No, we got a lot to get through. Let's rock.
All right, today the goal is very simple. You're going to leave this webinar with a proven system to generate at least 100 viral content ideas in under 30 minutes. That's our promise to you. So pay attention, get your pencils out, get your notes ready, because by the end of this, you're going to be overflowing with ideas to write about. So if you have the problem of staring at a blank page, that blinking cursor staring back at you, our goal is to solve that problem by the end of this video.
That's right. And we're going to go through a lot. This is going to move quick. All right. Our goal is not to do a bunch of hand wavy stuff. We want to give you highly actionable frameworks. So we're going to move quickly, but don't worry if you feel like you missed something or you didn't write something down as quick enough. We're also going to send a replay afterwards that you can go through as well. So take away the gold nuggets that you can and know that you can always come back to it. All right, Dickie, this is always the big slide of the day.
This is the endless idea generator in one screenshot. By the end of this, you will know exactly what every single one of these sections means. It's basically 3 parts. We're going to go through choosing your proven topics. We're going to help you figure out which piece of credibility is right for you. And then we're going to take you through a step-by-step guide to our 4A framework, which says, hey, if you have one idea, it doesn't mean you have one idea. It really means you have 100, 200, 300 ideas. And we're going to help you walk step-by-step through taking your idea and going through these proven approaches. And I can't wait. I'm like itching to get to the 4A framework because I know it's a mind-blowing kind of unveiling for a lot of people when we get there. But we got to start with choosing your proven topics. That starts with the 2-year test. Cole, you want to talk about it?
Awesome. So here's ultimately what goes into generating infinite ideas. All right. The first big thing that you need to understand is that idea generation is a skill. It's not something that you just wake up in the morning and magically these ideas show up and, then everything's taken care of. Coming up with ideas is a skill. And so what we're going to walk you through is a framework where you can practice that skill and generate ideas over and over and over again. And the key pieces here are the topic. What do you want to write about? The credibility. Why should the reader trust you to write about that topic? And we'll talk about personal credibility and borrowed credibility. And then third is the structure. So we call these, you have different paths, different approaches. How are you actually walking the reader through that idea? Okay. So the first thing is the topic. Dickie, maybe you want to dig into this. Where does everyone go wrong with picking the topic?
Everyone goes wrong by picking a big, broad, general topic. So to start, drop in the chat, what is one topic right now that you think you want to write about? So I'll use a couple pull examples from the chat here. Go ahead and drop in the chat. What do you want to write about? There it is. Right away, people say something like productivity or health or wellness or what I don't even know. Very broad relationships, right? Strategy, branding, big, broad, general topics that, to be honest, are way too broad, have way too much competition, and aren't going to unlock kind of the real big benefits of putting content out on the internet that come with specificity.
That's right. So here's the key. Whenever you think to yourself, I want to write about X, that is version 1. And your goal is to add modifier words to get to version 2, version 3, version 4 that get more specific over time. Okay. Specificity is the secret. So the first big question that people ask is, well, but wait, okay, maybe you don't know what you want to write about. I'm not sure which topics I want to dig into. Maybe you have a big, broad topic. I want to write about productivity, or maybe you're starting from a complete blank slate. Okay. The whole key to coming up with ideas, and it doesn't matter if you have blank slate, 0 idea, or you have big, broad topic. The whole key is using what we call the 2-year test. And the 2-year test basically says, who were you 2 years ago? Could be 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago, even 2 days ago, but 2 years ago is a good way of thinking about it. Who were you 2 years ago? What problems did you have? What questions did you have? What skills were you thinking about building in yourself? What life transitions hadn't you gone through yet, right? Who were you 2 years ago? And who are you now? And who you were 2 years ago is your target reader. That is the easiest way of thinking about how do I generate new ideas.
Here's the breakthrough belief to have here is that most beginner writers think they have to be an expert in something before they can write about it. And they look at all the big, broad topics and they're like, I'm just not an expert. I don't think I have anything credible enough to say on this. But what the 2-year test does is help you realize you are an expert in exactly the things you've experienced over the last 2 years. So when you start to reflect on this question, a lot of things should come up. You've definitely built a lot of skills. You've overcome a lot of struggles. You've gone and learned new topics and life transitions and all these other things that once you start to make this big, long list, that is all the raw material you have to write about. So Cole, if you flip to the next slide, you'll see some examples. Maybe in the last 2 years, you went from, hey, I used to have a very strange diet to now, boom, I'm a vegan. Or maybe you just started exercising, or you graduated college, you got married, you learned email marketing. These are all the raw materials that you have at your disposal to start writing about. So the very first part of the endless idea generator is letting you realize, hey, no matter who you are, you have a ton to write about. And let's unlock that with the 2-year test.
Yes. And so where the 2-year test comes into play with specificity, right, is you want to think about, okay, what do I want to write about broadly? And then how do I get more specific based on what I've experienced, right? Because someone might say, I want to write about wellness, right? But how you get more specific is you go, well, actually, 2 years ago, I wasn't a vegan and now I am a vegan. So I want to write about, veganism. But then you can get even more specific, right? You don't want to just write about veganism broadly. You want to write about how someone can get started being a vegan because you got started being a vegan, right? So the more that you can tie specificity to the 2-year test, the easier it is to start coming up with ideas to write about.
So we'll dig into some of those specificity topics, but the big thing to take away here is that all you're doing with the 2-year test is finding out all the parts of your life that have become incredibly obvious to you, but are incredibly novel to other people. And that's what you're going to write about. You have a ton of experience and the 2-year test will help you unlock that. So now drop in the chat one topic based on the 2-year test, just thinking about what are some problems you've solved that you could potentially write about from here.
Yeah.
The hospitality industry.
Yeah. What's something that you started, right? Or something that you learned how to do, or a transition that you experienced. Like a great example we talk about, I just moved from LA to Miami 3 months ago, right? Now, I can't go write about, hey, here's everything that you can do in Miami. That's broad, and I don't know yet. But I can certainly write about how to move across the country to Miami, right? Because I just experienced it.
I see a lot of much tighter and clearer examples here of things. Learned how to read tarot, learned email marketing for entrepreneurs, started running ultra marathons, right? Learned how to research a patent. Those are all great things that once you just unlock of saying, hey, I have a lot of experience with this, I could go write about it. That's part one of the endless idea generator. From here, we're going to add specificity. So Cole, you want to give an overview of this one?
Yeah. So the whole key to the endless idea generator is when you start more specific, it actually is easier to come up with even more topics. So the reason we got to go through step 1 is because we got to get out of big, broad territory and we got to start getting a little bit more specific. Because then as you start getting more and more specific, what happens is you become the de facto quote unquote expert because what you're talking about is so specific and relevant to whatever it is that you've experienced. And we're going to talk about the difference between personal credibility and borrowed credibility. And in both cases, you want to be hyper specific about why the reader should trust you. Okay, because this is really important. In order for the reader to give you their attention, they need to know, well, why should I listen to you? Right? And so the way to get more specific here is you either add specificity to the point where you are the expert, right? So using the LA to Miami example, right? I'm not a travel guru, so I'm not going to try and pretend to be one, but I did just move across the country, so I can talk about what that's like, right? So you get so specific on, hey, I experienced this, so I can talk about it, right? And also thinking about who was the version of you 2 years ago, because to that person, you are an expert. right? You did the thing that someone else is thinking about doing. And so this is one of the big beliefs that we need to break.
The key belief here is that if you feel like you are not an expert, you are simply not being specific enough, right? So Cole, if you wanted to create the ultimate guide to moving to Miami, I would add specificity with how to do it with a dog, right? Because you had to move from LA to Miami with a dog. What does that mean? You had to drive. Here's the route I took. Here's what I wish I would have done when I packed up all my stuff, because I ended up having to ship it across the country. It took 2 extra weeks, right? You have such a unique set of experiences moving from LA with a dog, shipping half your stuff, and driving here. Those are all the layers of specificity that you could add to now, boom, you are maybe the most qualified person in the world to talk about that exact thing.
Yes. And that is where the belief is. You don't have to be, Tony Robbins or Oprah or some like massive person in order to talk about things. You just need to get specific enough to the point where you're saying, I experienced this, and so let me tell you what I learned, right? And so there's a bunch of different ways that you can get more specific here. And here's, 7 very common ways of doing this, of niching down, right? Getting more and more and more specific. So if we stick with the LA to Miami example, right? By price, here's how to move from LA to Miami for under $5,000 all in, right? Here's how to do it for less than $5,000. By problem, here's how to move from LA to Miami if you want to do it in 3 days, not 7 days. Like, oh, okay, well, that's a different problem. I got to get there in 1 weekend. How do I do it, right? By industry, here's how to move across the country if your company isn't willing to give you time off to move. Oh, that's a different problem, right? By location, here are all the different places that you should stay when you're moving across the country from LA to Miami, right? Here are the coolest Airbnbs in each state along the way. Okay. By situation, right? How do you move with a dog? How do you move with a dog that gets car sick? Right? Like more and more and more specific. By experience, how to move across the country if you've never moved across the country before, right? Oh, you're afraid of this happening. You're unsure of this happening, right? By demographic, how do you move across the country if you just graduated from college and you have no money to move, right? So all of a sudden you take one idea and you start getting more specific by all these different ways. And now we just rambled off. Those are 7 different ideas. And inside each of those 7 different ideas are 7 more different ideas.
Wait a second though, Cole, because if I get this specific, that means no one's going to read it. That means there's no way there's anyone out there when I start, if I don't talk about relationships or productivity, there's just not enough people out there that are going to read what I have to say. What would you say about that?
This is everyone's biggest fear. If I get more specific, then that means I'm cutting readers out. Okay. But no, this is not true. So real quick, drop in the chat. Take whatever you said you wanted to write about and imagine the person. Who do you want that to be? Right? Where do they live? How old are they? What degree do they have or don't have? What industry are they in? Right?
I see a great one here. Moving to a new country in your 40s, right? How to immigrate in your 40s is much different than immigrating in your 20s, right? Building personal brand on LinkedIn for junior marketers, much better than just building a personal brand, right? As you add this layer of specificity, remember, using the 2-year test, you want to just create the person that you were 2 years ago, because you've solved that problem. You know exactly who it is you're writing for. If you could go back and write a letter to your 2-year-ago self on any skill that you've developed, more than likely you would save yourself tons of time. And that's what you're doing when you start to share your ideas. It's you're distilling all of your experience over 2 years, 10 years, 5 years, whatever it is, and writing a letter to your former self saying, hey, I've gone through all this. Here's everything I wish I knew back then. And that's what you unlock when you start to share with things that you've solved in the past.
Here's an amazing example in the chat. Running a business online for farmers market vendors. Okay. Now, if you say, I want to write about running a business online, if that's all you said, how many farmers market vendors are going to see that and click on that? Probably not very many. Why? Because they don't see themselves in it, right? But the moment you say, hey, this is specifically for you, farmers market vendors, a farmers market vendor looks at that and goes, I'm going to read all of it because you are saying it's for me, right? And this is the hardest belief for people to break, is they think I need to go as broad as possible because I want everyone. And in actuality, it's the opposite. If you try and write something for everyone, you write something for no one. So you want to get more specific. Okay. So here we talked about the topic, and we talked about using the 2-year test and getting more and more specific. Next, we need to talk about the credibility. Okay.
All right, let's pause before we get on this. Take a deep breath, because we just sprinted through a ton. We looked at your topics, we brainstormed them with the 2-year test, and then we added specificity. That is just the first part. By now, you should have at least one topic that you're interested in writing about with some kind of specificity, right? Breaking into a tech career at the age of 30. I love that idea, right? You can get more specific, but that's what we're going to go from here, is the credibility, which is 2 different ways of thinking about your topic. So let's go back to this example of, what do we want to use for this one, Cole? What's a good example of something that can be both niche and broad?
I mean, we talk about copywriting all the time. Copywriting is a great example.
Perfect. So let's go with copywriting. Now, there's a couple ways you could talk about copywriting. One, you could say copywriting for email marketers looking to sell health and wellness supplements, right? Getting super specific, people with a product for sale, and you go and share everything about how to create a perfect email campaign. You know, you work as a copywriter for email marketers and you go and share everything. That's a very specific thing. But then copywriting in general is more of a broad topic. So there's 2 ways to think about the credibility. You can either add enough specificity where you have the personal credibility to write about it, which is, I've done this before and I know the answer. Or broadly, you can say, hey, I'm not an expert, but I went out and looked at all these experts, heard what they had to say, distilled what they said, and here it is packaged up nicely for you, right? So it's this barbell of, you have some things that you know incredibly well, and you get so specific that you can share your expertise, or you go as broad as possible and say, hey, I'm not the expert here, but I went and learned from all the experts. I've curated what they have to say, and I'm going to share it that way.
Yes. So here's a great example, okay? Because a lot of times people think, oh, it's like this imposter syndrome feeling, you know, oh, I have to have achieved all of these amazing things in order for people to trust me. No, not necessarily, right? So here's a great example of the same topic, but executed with 2 different types of credibility. So personal credibility, you know, for years, I was a ghostwriter. I had a ghostwriting agency. I've ghostwritten for hundreds of executives, right? I've ghostwritten thousands of pieces. That's personal credibility. I say, hey, I've experienced this thing. I've done this thing. Let me pass along some of my frameworks. Let me pass along some of my templates, right? Dickie goes, and Dickie, when you wrote this, you know, you were just getting started in writing. It's not like you were some guru, right? And when you wrote this, it was, hey, I'm not saying I'm the expert. I'm saying I went out and I found the expert, and I'm distilling everything they said down into something digestible. And both work.
And it's very freeing, because you might not be a total expert, but what you're going to do when you borrow credibility and go research the experts and share what they had to say, you're going to learn much faster. So my first year of learning the craft of writing, all I did was look up what the experts have done, distill what they had, and then shared it. I ended up doing that enough where now I can come up with my own frameworks, because I've seen all these different moving pieces. I have a good idea of how the game works, and now I can come up with my own. So if you're a beginner saying, hey, I'm not really an expert in any topic, but I want to learn about these things, do the 2-year test in reverse and say, what are all the things I want to learn over the next 2 years? How can I go research those and share those along the way, so that while I'm learning, I'm going to build an audience in the process, I'm going to learn faster, and I'm going to unlock all the upsides that come with just putting things out there.
And the big key here is that you can and should do both. So here's another example of the same thing, but flipped. So this time, Dickie's the one using personal credibility. Hey, I spent over 500 hours studying legendary authors and copywriters. And here I'm borrowing credibility. I'm saying, hey, I'm not telling my story as a writer. I'm telling Ryan Holiday, another writer's story, right? And so it's actually not about doing one or the other. There's benefits of doing both. And so the thing to remember with credibility is the reader just needs a reason to trust you. So think of it like, when you go to a dinner party and you overhear someone talking and they're like, yeah, I just bought my first, rental property or whatever. And then you come up and you're like, hey, I'm thinking about buying a rental property, can you give me some insight? The reason you trust that person isn't because they're like the biggest expert on earth. It's just they already did the thing that you want to do, right? They're one step ahead of you. So all you need to do is just tell the reader either, hey, I'm one step ahead of you, or I went out and I found the person who's one step ahead of you. And this is what you need to know.
The way I like to think about this is think back to third grade. When you were in third grade and you looked at an eighth grader, it was like they were an alien. They had a completely different life. They went to a different school. It was like, I'm not even interested in what they're doing. But the coolest people on earth were the fourth graders. They were one step ahead of you. And all you wanted to know was, hey, you get 20 extra minutes of recess. How's that? Or, wow, you get to go a different part of the lunchroom. What is that like? Or what is this teacher like? Or what's this topic like? And it's just one step ahead. And the realization is that on the internet, we are all third graders. We all have something we could share with the people behind us and learn from the people in front of us. So you don't have to be an expert in something to write about it. All you have to do is be one step ahead of someone and share what you're learning along the way.
I love that example. Yeah. You just want to know what's up with the fourth graders. That's it. So real quick, which one of these do you find yourself gravitating to? And again, you can and should use both, but oftentimes people gravitate to one or the other, at least to start. Are you thinking more, I want to lean into personal credibility, or are you wanting to lean into borrowed credibility? You want to curate other people's? Yeah, seeing a bunch of both. And here's the thing is that there's benefits of doing both, right? I mean, you want to say, hey, here's how I'm thinking about it, but you also want to say, here's how other really smart people are thinking about it, right? Your audience on that given topic wants all of it. They want to know what you think, and they want to know what all the other smart people in your niche and in your category think, right? So you want to do both.
All right, another deep breath. We did the topic. We did the credibility. How's it going so far? Drop in the chat. Are these frameworks helpful so far? Any mind-blowing moments? Any realizations? Can we keep going? Do we need to pause at all? Should we keep going? Credibility is great. Keep going. Awesome. Okay. From here, we're going to go through the proven paths and approaches, which is the 4A framework. So the 4A framework is my favorite part of this whole presentation. And it's this idea that any idea on the internet or in the world, you can say in one of four ways. There's actionable, which is here's how. There's analytical, which is a breakdown. There's aspirational, which is a story saying here's how and yes, you can. And then anthropological, which is here's why, kind of speaking to the human nature. Now, go ahead and drop in the chat. What comes to mind if you think of a book in the personal finance world? What are some personal finance books that come to mind? Anything that you guys immediately have read on the topic? Drop that in the chat. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Psychology of Money. Awesome. This is a very big topic, right? Personal finance. There's so many different ways that you could potentially talk about it. But once you see the 4A framework, you can't unsee it, because what does this look like for the personal finance topic as you go through all of these books? It looks like this. If you jump in, there you go. Right? So here it is, personal finance with the 4A framework, right? I Will Teach You to Be Rich. That is actionable. Analytical, Changing World Order from Ray Dalio. Aspirational, Rich Dad, Poor Dad from Robert Kiyosaki. And then anthropological, Psychology of Money. One topic, personal finance, 4 different buckets like this. And people can build an entire career around one bucket in one of these frameworks, right? All Ramit Sethi does, if you've read any of his stuff, it's like pure action. But if you read Psychology of Money, it's like, hey, you don't even know what you don't know about money. And I'm going to show you how. right? So I hope this unlock is right away hey, I might want to talk about actionable productivity tips for this type of person, or I want to share my journey exploring productivity and how I went from a toxic relationship to a great one, right? There's tons that you can share with these examples, but I love this slide because it drives the point home that if you think you have one idea, you don't, you could say it in 4 ways. And now we're going to show you the 1,000 different ways that you can say each of these.
Yeah. So how does this connect back, right? Remember when we started with what's the topic? If you just said, I want to write about money, well, there's a gazillion different ways you can write about money, right? Or if you say, I just want to write about real estate, well, there's a gazillion different ways you can write about real estate, right? And so part of narrowing down is figuring out not just topic and getting more specific, but how do you want to write about the topic, right? Are you going to instruct people, actionable? Are you going to give them data and trends and analysis on the topic, analytical, right? Do you just want to motivate them, right? You're not really giving them like a how-to guide. You're just like, I did it and you can too, aspirational. Or are you like, hey, you're not even thinking about this the right way, anthropological. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm just going to reframe your thinking, right? And so each one of these, usually people gravitate to one of these. You can combine them, but ultimately people gravitate to one of these. So let's walk through each one so that you understand how to execute this, right? The first one is actionable. Actionable is anytime you see how to, right? Here's how to buy your first rental property. Here's how to start eating gluten-free. Here's how to install a refrigerator, right? Here's how to improve yourself by meditating every day. Action. And so part of writing actionable content is being very specific about, hey, reader, you're struggling with this problem. I'm going to walk you through step by step how to go from A to C, right? So if you find yourself writing about that type of thing, if you like writing instructional content, it's worth being conscious of and going, oh, I'm an actionable writer. So what does that mean? All of the ideas you come up with should be actionable ideas. Here's how to do this. Here's how to do that.
And these are some of the proven approaches within the actionable framework. You have share your tips. Here's some tools you use. Here's some quick hacks or pieces of advice that you wish you had. Here are the resources to learn, frameworks that are helpful, ultimate guides to do something step by step, or you can curate the best books, podcasts, Twitter threads, LinkedIn posts, blog posts, TED Talks. All of that is actionable to help someone take action on whatever the core idea is. Now, next one. The next one is analytical. Cole, you want to break this one down?
So analytical is anytime you are analyzing, right, what's working. And typically it's, I'm noticing some data points, I'm noticing some trends, I'm noticing some reasons, like here's reasons why this happens, right? You're looking at something and you're extracting insight. So analytical content, someone actionable might go, here's how to buy your first rental property. But someone analytical might go, hey, I went and analyzed all the rental properties in the Chicagoland area, and here are the 3 geographies where the numbers say you're going to get the best ROI on the properties that you buy. 2 completely different types of writers, right? But both very compelling, and both are going to attract different types of readers. So any industry, literally the 4A framework works for every industry on planet Earth. Analytical is thinking about what are some of the data points that are worth paying attention to, right? So we do this in digital writing all the time. Some of the content we do is analytical. We went and wrote 100 Twitter threads. Here were the 10 that we noticed that really stood out because of how well they were performing. We did an analysis on our writing.
And these are some of the most helpful ones that once you've done a lot of work, you can do a postmortem and say, hey, I did X, Y, and Z. Here's some things I learned, right? Trends, numbers, reasons, examples of what worked, teardowns, breaking down something, a swipe file with tons of examples. So a lot on the analytical side. And we'll show you after how to combine analytical with a couple of the other proven approaches that is really helpful. From here, we go to aspirational. So we started with actionable, then we went to analytical. Now we are on aspirational, which is sharing your story. So for a lot of people, they love writing about their experience, right? Things they've learned along the way, lessons, mistakes, reflections, personal stories of growth, right? Underrated traits. These are helping the reader understand, hey, I know where you are, and here's where I used to be. Here's where I am now, and you can get there too. Rich Dad, Poor Dad's a great example of this. It's basically his entire story, learning about money through the lens of having one person in his life that really understood money and one who didn't, and how he had to unlearn all of these poor beliefs along the way and saying, hey, if you kind of were raised like this and have these current beliefs, here's how to unlearn them. A lot of people really resonate with this because they love to talk about what they've done. And it's extremely helpful when you are about to go on a new path and you can look at someone ahead of you and say, they've done this, I can do this too. And here are all the things they've avoided. That's going to save you a lot of time, a lot of headache, and you can really develop a strong audience if you're continuing to tell your story along the way.
Aspirational content is primarily, if actionable is like, here's the steps, like literally 1, 2, 3, this is what you have to do. Aspirational content typically speaks more to and here's the fears holding you back, right? Here's the emotional blocks that you're facing. It's not that you don't know what to do, right? It's that you're getting in your own way, right? There's a reason why we love these stories of like, oh, this person overcame this tremendous obstacle, right? Because what the story is really doing is reminding us that we can do it too, right? That's why the aspirational is, I did it, you can too in some way. So what you'll find is as you write, you're going to gravitate to one of these buckets. You're going to notice, oh, when I tell aspirational stories, readers really love it. And when I get into the actionable stuff, readers aren't as engaged. Okay, maybe I'm more of an aspirational writer, right? Or vice versa, right? And the last piece is anthropological. This one is probably the rarer one of the four, but Psychology of Money is a great example, right? Psychology of Money doesn't tell you step by step how to open an IRA, right? It doesn't tell you step by step how to create a personal finance budget, right? And it also doesn't really motivate you. It's not like the author's like, I did it and you can too, right? The whole book is like, hey, here's a little story. And isn't that interesting how the way that we're all taught to think about money isn't actually what the successful people do, right? It's more of a thinking reframe. And so here, it's also speaking to like, what are the underlying reasons why people are the way that they are? And aspirational is like, reader, I'm going to speak directly to your fears. Anthropological is like, hey, here's why lots of people in society do what they do, right? It's almost more psychology based. And so again, the more you write online, the more you're going to learn based on how readers engage with your work, which one of these 4 A's is your sweet spot, right? Because the data is going to tell you.
And we always get this question. So we just ran through all of the 4 A's. The big question is, can you combine them? And definitely the answer is yes. And to be honest, some of the most successful content you will see is some kind of combination like these. It's actionable and analytical. Like, I studied 100 landing pages, broke them all down. Here's why it works, and a step-by-step guide to creating your own, right? Or aspirational and anthropological. I used to have a horrible relationship with money. Here's my story. And then here's how I fixed it and why it happened. Or here's how you can too, right? You combine these and it really creates a potent framework. So the 4A framework, if anything, it makes you a better reader, because now every time you come across a piece of content, you're going to say, which of these 4 buckets is it falling in, right? You'll find, hey, I actually really like to read aspirational stuff, but I like to write actionable content, right? So the 4A framework is just a quick way of saying, whatever it is you're writing about, don't think I'm writing about money. I'm writing about actionable money content for this, that, and the other person, right? There's all these different buckets you can choose, which should broaden the universe and help you understand that, again, there's a lot that you can write about.
Yeah. So let's do a quick check here. Drop in the chat. Which one of these do you find yourself gravitating to? Or which one have you written more of in the past? Is there one of these where you go, oh, wow, after seeing this, I am an actionable writer day in and day out, or are you thinking, oh, you know what? I never really thought about it, but I would love to write more aspirational content. The whole key here is oftentimes writers just sit down and they just kind of go, okay, let's just see what words come out, right? And it's a very like spray and pray approach to writing. But our goal is to make all of these decisions conscious. So when you sit down to write, you should ask yourself, am I writing an actionable piece? Am I writing an analytical piece? Am I writing an aspirational piece? Or am I writing an anthropological piece? And even just starting with that is going to change how you think about, well, then what are you saying, right? Because you know, oh, if I'm writing an actionable piece, I should structure this in steps, right? Whereas, oh, I'm writing an analytical piece, I should structure this in reasons why things are happening, or data points, or statistics, right? So picking the direction is what really drives the writing.
All right, deep breath. Time to recap. We've covered a ton. We're going to run through exactly the system again and then give you the recap slide that you can take a screenshot of as you want to continue generating ideas. So we started with the endless idea generator, which are 3 pillars: picking your topic, finding your credibility, and going through the proven paths and approaches. We started with the 2-year test. That feels like a month ago. We've covered so much in this video. The 2-year test, finding the topics that you are credible enough to write about, reflecting over the last 2 years, skills, struggles, transformations, hobbies, stories, topics. It's all there. What I like to do, I don't have my journal next to me, but I take 1 page, I put 2-year test at the top, and I brainstorm a big list, as many of these as possible. Once you start to kind of give yourself the ability to get those ideas out, they're going to start to flow. Then you get specific. You choose one of these specificity levers, one of these 7 on the side. You can use as many of those as you want. The goal is to ramp these up until you are an expert on your topic. That's when you have a specific enough topic, when you take these 7 levers. And the easiest way to do this, who were you 2 years ago? Write to that person, right? So I was a beginner living in this city with this amount of money. Then you have your credibility, which is, I have my niche topic that's exactly who I was 2 years ago. Then I have my broad topic, and I'm going to borrow credibility from that side. You can do both. You can go learn from the experts and share, and you can also share your exact experience with personal credibility, or you can use borrowed credibility. Then from there, lastly, we explored the 4A framework, which is hopefully opening up your brain of all the different things you could go write about, the different ways you could write them, the different proven approaches on each of those. And with that gets us to the endless idea generator in 1 slide. Like we said at the beginning, we're going to run through this entire thing. Hopefully this all makes sense and you can screenshot this, use this. I think if you block 30 minutes, do the 2-year test, add some specificity, and go down the proven approaches, you're going to have at least 100 ideas to write about, maybe even more.
That's a marathon right there. I hope everyone was taking notes. Take a screenshot of this too, like Dickie said. Let's see though, what was most helpful. I mean, which one of these frameworks, you go, okay, this is really going to guide my idea generation and my writing process. 2-year test is super powerful. Put yourself in your shoes 2 years ago. What are all the questions you had? What were your hopes, dreams, and ambitions? What skills didn't you have yet? Right? What about specificity? Have you typically just gone, oh, I want to write about big, broad topics? Hopefully you can get more and more specific so that you understand, okay, if I want to get my target reader's attention, I need to say, this is for you, right? Different types of credibility. Why should the reader trust you? Personal credibility, borrowed credibility, and the 4As. The 4A framework is so underrated. Even if you just sit down when you write and ask yourself, which direction am I writing? Actionable, analytical, aspirational, anthropological. That alone is going to impact your writing in such an exponential way.